After my wife passed away, I never told my son about the timber contract she'd secretly negotiated on her late uncle's land in Montana, or the $600,000 sitting in a trust account with my name on it. 3 weeks later, my son sat across from me at my own kitchen table and told me, calm as anything, that they were putting my house on the market and putting me in a home. I just nodded and poured myself another cup of coffee. Before I go any further, tell me in the comments where you're tuning in from tonight. And if you've ever had family try to take advantage of you right when you were most vulnerable, hit that like button for me. My name is Walter. I'm 68 years old, and I spent 36 years as a union electrician, wiring up half the office towers in downtown Cleveland. My wife Doris and I were married for 40 years. We weren't rich people. We were careful people. We paid off our little 3-bedroom house in Lakewood one extra mortgage payment at a time, and we raised our son, Corey, to believe that hard work meant something. We paid for his associate's degree. We co-signed on his first house. We babysat his kids every single weekend for 6 years straight so he and his wife Danielle could keep their jobs. 3 weeks ago, my whole world went quiet. Doris died in her sleep after a long fight with her heart. One night, she was there next to me, breathing slow and even, and the next morning she just wasn't. Losing her felt like somebody had reached into my chest and pulled something out that I needed to keep functioning. The house, our house, felt like a museum all of a sudden. Every room had her in it, and none of it had her in it at all. Corey and Danielle came for the funeral. They cried in the front pew, they hugged all the relatives, and then 2 days later they were back in their own lives, an hour away in Solon, checking in with a phone call every few days that got shorter and shorter each time. I spent my days doing what I imagine every widower does. I wandered. I touched her reading glasses on the nightstand. I found her handwriting on grocery lists, stuck to the refrigerator with a magnet shaped like a lighthouse we bought in Maine on our honeymoon. I didn't know how a man was supposed to keep living in a house built entirely around another person. Then, this past Monday, my phone rang, and it was a woman named Patricia calling from a law office downtown, the kind with a nameplate made of real brass. She said Doris had set up an appointment for me, months in advance, in the event of her passing. I told her that had to be a mistake. Doris and I didn't have secrets. We sat at that same kitchen table every single month and went through the bills together. But I put on my one good sport coat anyway and drove down to a building I'd actually helped wire the electrical for 20 years earlier. Patricia handed me a manila folder and a small key. She told me the key belonged to a safety deposit box that Doris had opened at a credit union near her sister's place in Michigan. A box listed under Doris's maiden name, with me as the sole person entitled to open it after her death. I drove out there in a daze, my hands actually shaking on the wheel the whole way. Inside that box, I expected old photographs, maybe her mother's wedding ring. Instead, I found a stack of cashier's checks and a folder of paperwork thick as a phone book. Doris's uncle Raymond, a man I'd only met twice at reunions, had owned 400 acres of timberland out near Kalispell, Montana, that nobody in the family thought was worth much of anything. When he passed 9 years ago, he'd left it to Doris, and Doris, quietly, without ever telling me, had spent years negotiating a logging and land lease agreement with a timber company. According to the documents, that land had been generating steady income deposited into a private trust the whole time. Money she never touched, never spent, just let grow. The current balance was just over $600,000, and I was listed as the sole beneficiary. There was a letter, too, in her handwriting, a little shakier than I remembered it, probably written after her first hospital stay a few years back. She wrote that she never wanted this money to change who we were. She'd grown up watching her own father waste an inheritance and tear the family apart doing it, and she didn't want that poison anywhere near our son. She wanted Corey to build his own life, to know what it felt like to earn something, the same way I'd taught him to rewire a lamp instead of just buying a new one. She wrote that if I was reading this letter, it meant she was gone, and that she trusted me, and only me, to decide what came next. I sat in that little concrete vault room for the better part of an hour, just holding her letter against my chest, crying like I hadn't cried since the funeral. I felt so much love for that woman it nearly buckled my knees. And right alongside it, this deep, aching grief that she wasn't here to see my face when I opened that box. Eventually, I pulled myself together, put everything back in my briefcase, and drove home already thinking about how I could use this. I thought about Corey and Danielle, how they'd been complaining about their mortgage rate resetting, about daycare costs for the grandkids. I thought I could pay off their house outright. I thought about taking the grandkids to Disney World like Doris always wanted to do and never got the chance. I was so full of that bittersweet kind of hope, the kind where good news and grief get tangled up together in your chest, that I barely noticed the moving truck parked crooked in my own driveway until I was almost on top of it. The front door was standing wide open. My stomach dropped straight through the floor. I walked in holding my briefcase like it was the only solid thing left in the world, and what I saw stopped me cold. Two men in coveralls were wrapping Doris's china cabinet in blankets. Another one was carrying our old recliner, my recliner, out to the truck like it was a piece of garbage. Boxes were stacked in the hallway with black markers scrawled across them, and standing in the middle of my living room, clipboard in hand, directing traffic like she owned the place, was my daughter-in-law Danielle. Corey stood next to her in a golf shirt, arms crossed, looking entirely too comfortable. I cleared my throat. Corey turned around, and for just a half a second, his face did something scared and guilty before it smoothed right back over into that easy salesman smile he's had since he was 17 years old and got caught taking money out of my wallet. "Dad," he said, "we didn't think you'd be back from your appointment this soon." "What appointment?" I said, keeping my voice level even though my pulse was hammering in my ears. "What exactly is happening in my house, Corey?" Danielle stepped forward with her coffee mug, the picture of calm concern. "Walter, please, just take a breath. We've been so worried about you. Worried enough to pack up my living room without asking me a single thing," I said. Corey sighed, that big performative sigh, and picked up a glossy brochure off the coffee table. He held it out to me the way you'd hand a sympathy card to a stranger. "Dad, you're 68. This house is way too much for one person. You've been wandering around here talking to yourself. It's not safe." I looked down at the brochure, Cedar Grove Senior Residence. On the cover, a bunch of elderly folks sat in a dim common room, staring at a television that wasn't even turned on. It wasn't some nice retirement community with a golf course. It was the kind of place families use to disappear a parent they've stopped wanting to deal with. "We've decided it's time," Corey said, his voice hardening just slightly under all that fake tenderness. "We're selling the house. It's what's best for you." Danielle rested her manicured hand on his shoulder and gave me a look of pure triumph she didn't even try very hard to hide. She thought she was looking at a broken old man who'd fold the second real pressure got applied. And for one weak, foolish second, I almost did. I looked at my son, the boy I taught to throw a curveball in the backyard, the boy I stayed up with until 2 in the morning helping him study for his electrical apprenticeship test. And I thought, maybe they're drowning in debt somewhere and too proud to ask. I had $600,000 in a briefcase. I could fix this. I could pay off whatever hole they dug themselves into and we could be a family again. I actually opened my mouth to tell them about the trust, about Montana, about all of it. But then my eyes landed on a stack of papers half hidden under that brochure, right on top, in bold black letters. Durable power of attorney. My mouth went dry. I stepped closer and read enough of it to understand exactly what it said. It gave Corey full legal authority over my finances, my medical decisions, my property. It gave him the right to sell this house without my consent. And at the bottom, next to a notary stamp, was my signature. A signature I never wrote. Every warm, forgiving feeling I had toward my son evaporated in about half a second, replaced by something cold and very, very clear. This wasn't a son trying to talk his stubborn old man into a smart decision. This was fraud. This was theft, dressed up in a golf shirt and a concerned expression. I looked up from that forged page and locked eyes with Corey. Whatever guilt had flickered across his face a minute ago was gone now. He just watched me, waiting to see what I'd do, like a man watching a fuse burn down. 36 years running electrical for high rises taught me one lesson that never once let me down. When something's live and dangerous, you don't grab it with both hands and start yanking. You go slow. You find the breaker. You cut the power at the source before anybody gets hurt, including you. So I lifted a trembling finger and pointed at the document, and I let my voice go soft and confused. "Corey, what is that paper? Why does it have my name on it? I don't remember signing anything." The tension in the room shifted instantly. Corey's eyes flicked to Danielle, silently begging her to take the lead, and she didn't miss a beat. That triumphant little smirk melted into practiced sympathy so fast it was honestly impressive to watch. "Walter," she said, crouching down slightly like she was talking to a child, "we didn't want to have to tell you this way. We spoke with Dr. Halloran the day your wife passed. He pulled Corey aside and told him he was concerned about your mental state. The stress, the grief, it can do things to a man your age." "My mental state is fine," I said, letting a little quiver creep into my voice. "My blood pressure's better than yours, Danielle." She pulled out a manila folder and handed me a photocopied page from what looked like real hospital letterhead. Near the bottom, highlighted in yellow, somebody had scrawled a note about signs of cognitive decline consistent with acute grief and recommended supervision. I stared at those words and felt something twist hard in my gut. Doris's doctor barely spoke 2 sentences to me in that hospital hallway. Corey must have cornered him, spun some story, and gotten just enough ammunition to build this whole rotten case before his mother's body was even cold. Corey stepped in and grabbed both my hands, his grip firm, his eyes doing their best impression of heartbreak. "Dad, you've been leaving the stove on. Danielle found the back door wide open last week. You're not eating unless somebody puts a plate right in front of you. We're losing you too, and I can't take it." None of that was true, not one word of it. But I understood exactly what they were building, brick by brick, right there in my own living room. A paper trail, a story so airtight that by the time anybody official got involved, there'd be no room left for me to argue. "I don't remember any of that," I whispered, letting my shoulders slump, staring at the floor like a man who'd already given up. "We know you don't," Danielle said, rubbing slow circles on my back like she was comforting a toddler. "That's exactly why we had to step in." I looked back up at that forged signature one more time. "But I never signed this, Corey. I would never sign away my whole life without reading it first." I said. Corey let go of my hands and straightened his back, and I watched him actually work up the nerve to look proud of himself. "We forged it to protect you from the stress of it, Dad. We're getting you into a good facility where you'll be safe." I heard the words, but for a second my brain refused to process them. "We forged it," said out loud, plain as ordering a sandwich. A wave of rage came up through my chest, so hot and fast I nearly lost control of my own face. I wanted to grab the collar of that golf shirt and put him through the drywall. I wanted to open that briefcase right there and throw $600,000 in his lying face and watch him choke on it. Instead, I didn't move a muscle. I have spent decades of my life around live current, around panels that could kill a careless man in a heartbeat. And the first thing you learn is that panic gets people hurt. If I exploded right now, showed even an ounce of the fury boiling in me, Danielle would use it as living proof of exactly the instability they'd invented on paper. They'd call the police, wave that forged document and highlighted hospital note around, and I could be sitting in a locked facility before dinner. I was cornered. And the only way through a corner like that is to make them believe they'd already won. So I let out a long, shaky breath, dropped my shoulders, and let my hand fall away from the briefcase handle. "You really think this is what's best?" I mumbled, letting my voice crack down the middle. "You think I can't take care of myself?" Corey's whole posture relaxed with relief. He put both hands on my shoulders, gentle now, victorious. "It's the only way, Dad. Just go lie down. We'll finish up out here." I nodded and shuffled off down the hallway, dragging my feet, playing the exact broken old man they needed me to be. The second my bedroom door clicked shut behind me, I stood up straight, breathed easy, and slid my briefcase into the bottom drawer of my dresser, underneath a stack of old flannel shirts. I stayed in that room the rest of the night, listening to the muffled thumps of my furniture being carried out to a truck. Around 2 in the morning I got up quiet for a glass of water, and through the kitchen window I caught sight of Danielle standing out on the back patio in the cold, pacing, whispering fast and sharp into her phone, glancing over her shoulder every few seconds like she expected somebody to be watching. I eased the window open just a crack. The wind swallowed most of her words, but the tone was unmistakable, defensive, then aggressive, then pleading. The exact rhythm of somebody negotiating with a person they were terrified of. She hung up, stood there a moment, breathing hard, then pulled a familiar orange pill bottle out of her coat pocket. I recognized it instantly. It was the brain health supplement she'd bought for me that same week, the one she'd insisted I take every morning, even filling up a little plastic weekly organizer for me so I wouldn't have to worry about it. I watched her crouch down by Doris's old rose bed, crack open capsule after capsule, and dump the contents into the dirt. Then she pulled a small plastic bag from her coat, filled with some kind of crushed white powder, and started refilling every single empty capsule with it, sealing them back up with a steadiness that made my skin crawl. She loaded them right back into my weekly pill organizer, Monday through Sunday, and carried it back inside. That fog I'd been feeling for 2 weeks, the fatigue, the strange blank patches in my memory, all of it clicked into place at once, cold as ice water down my spine. It wasn't grief. It was chemistry. My own family was drugging me to manufacture the exact symptoms they needed on paper. The next morning I took my pill like always, but I tucked it under my tongue and spat it into a napkin the second Danielle turned her back. And once their car pulled out of the driveway for work, the tired old widower disappeared completely. I walked straight into Corey's home office, sat down at his computer, and logged in using his childhood dog's name and his graduation year, a password I'd watched him use for 15 years without him ever once thinking to change it. His browser history had nothing about senior living facilities. Not one search. That glossy brochure was a prop. Nothing more. What it did have, pages and pages of it, was searches for offshore accounts, expedited residency programs in Panama, and listings for beachfront rentals near Tulum. His banking dashboard told the rest of the story. Maxed cards. A brutal balloon payment coming due on a truck he couldn't afford. And buried in there, a final notice from an unlicensed lending outfit demanding $350,000, with language ugly enough that I understood immediately. These weren't people you simply defaulted on and walked away from. I found the emails too. Danielle, corresponding with some unlicensed broker under a fake business name, pushing to list our house at a steep discount. Fast, cash only, no inspections. One line stopped my heart cold. Don't worry about the old man, he's too out of it to know what he's signing. I sat there with my hands shaking on the armrests of my son's chair, feeling 4 decades of fatherhood curdle into something entirely different. I wasn't looking at my boy anymore. I was looking at a stranger wearing his face. That afternoon the doorbell rang, sharp and sudden. Through the peephole stood a heavy-set man in a leather jacket, knuckles scarred, the kind of calm menace you don't mistake for a delivery driver. I kept the chain on and cracked the door. He didn't wait for pleasantries. One kick and the chain snapped like a twig, and he had me by the collar against the wall before I could even get a breath in. "You tell your son," he growled, "that if we don't have our money by Friday, this house burns down with whoever's still standing inside it." He dropped me to the floor and walked out without another word, leaving me gasping against the baseboard, my collarbone throbbing where his fingers had dug in. I had less than 48 hours now, a debt collector's deadline pressing down on top of a legal one, and I understood I couldn't fight this the way an angry man fights. I needed a weapon sharper than rage. That night, when Corey and Danielle came home, I told them, voice trembling right on cue, that I'd made peace with the move, but that I wanted one last thing first, a bus trip to visit my late brother's grave outside Toledo before they locked me away for good. Danielle couldn't hide her relief. She booked the ticket herself before I'd even finished the sentence. The next morning she dropped me at the station, hugged me with real tears in her eyes, actual crocodile tears, and drove off satisfied. I waited until she was gone, then walked straight to the taxi stand and had the driver take me to the airport instead. I flew to Kalispell, with my briefcase locked against my chest, the entire flight. Standing on Doris's land for the first time, 400 acres of pine running clear to the mountains, I felt something in my chest ease for the first time in 3 weeks. I found the attorney Doris's paperwork pointed me toward, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Renata Cole who managed the timber trust. I laid everything out for her. The forged power of attorney, the fake brochure, the poisoned capsules, the debt collector's threat, all of it, and slid the briefcase across her desk. She didn't blink at the cash. She picked up the phone and started making calls before I'd even finished my coffee. Within a day, using a portion of the trust money, she'd set up a blind holding company, something called Bridgewater Property Group, with my name nowhere on any public document. Then she explained something that made the whole plan click into place in my head. A power of attorney, forged or not, only lets you control assets a person still legally owns. It's worthless against property that's already gone. I signed the deed to my Lakewood house over to Bridgewater right there in her office, in my own real signature. Watched 68 years of my life get legally tucked into a vault no forged document could ever touch. Flying home, I felt something close to peace for the first time since Doris passed. But the second my taxi pulled up to my own driveway, I buried that steady, clear-headed man again and brought the shuffling widower back out to play. Boxes were stacked everywhere inside. Corey and Danielle were both home early, huddled over a laptop, and jumped up the second they heard the door. Danielle rushed over, took my duffel bag like I might drop it, asked in her sweetest voice how the trip went. I mumbled something about missing Doris and let my eyes go glassy. Corey guided me toward the couch, told me the buyers wanted to close first thing tomorrow and just needed my signature on one more form. Danielle slid the paper across the coffee table with a pen. I let my hand shake exactly right, scrawled out a jagged, barely legible signature, and watched the two of them exchange a look of pure, greedy satisfaction the second I lifted the pen. They thought that was the last hurdle. I heard the champagne cork pop from my bedroom 20 minutes later. That night, once their door clicked shut upstairs, I crept into the living room and stuck a small recorder underneath the coffee table, the kind of tiny, long-range device I'd picked up in Montana on the way back through the airport. I fed the wireless earpiece into my ear and lay in the dark, listening. Their conversation started with relief, then turned businesslike fast. The buyer was wiring $1.1 million by 9 the next morning. The second it cleared, they'd wire $350,000 straight to the lender's routing number to clear the debt before Friday's deadline. The rest, they said, was their fresh start in Tulum. Then Corey's voice dropped, and he asked what they were going to do with me. Danielle laughed, cold as anything, and told him she'd already canceled the senior living reservation days ago. That brochure had only ever been a prop. Instead, using the forged power of attorney and the doctored medical note, she'd arranged an involuntary commitment to a state psychiatric facility, a place with no visitors, no phone calls, a locked ward with no windows. By the time anyone noticed, they'd be sipping drinks on a beach 1,000 miles away. I sat there in the dark absorbing that, thinking the worst had already been said. Then Corey's voice dropped even lower, shaking now, and he asked her something that stopped my heart cold in my chest. "What about Mom?" he whispered. "What if Dr. Halloran ever says something? What if Dad finds out what we actually did?" My stomach turned to ice. "Keep your voice down," Danielle hissed. "Nobody's finding out anything. He believes we were following her wishes." "We weren't following her wishes," Corey said, voice cracking. "She was trying to talk to the nurses that last night. She wanted to change her will before the surgery. We told the hospital she'd already signed a DNR when she hadn't. We told them not to push so hard on the resuscitation." I gripped the edge of my nightstand so hard my knuckles went white, the room spinning slow around me. My wife hadn't simply passed in her sleep like I'd been told. They had let her go early, on purpose, because a stronger heart and one more conversation with a lawyer would have cost them everything they were planning to steal. Danielle's voice turned flat and businesslike again. "She was already fading, Corey. We just made sure it happened before she signed anything that would have cut us out completely. It was the smart call. Don't lose your nerve now." Every ounce of grief left in me burned off in an instant, replaced by something with no temperature at all. I wasn't a mourning husband anymore. I was a man who had just discovered his son had helped kill his mother. I thought about every double shift I'd worked, climbing scaffolding 40 stories up so this boy would never know hunger. And I understood, with total clarity, that the person wearing his face didn't deserve one more ounce of my mercy. I spent the rest of that night packing quietly, laying out a suit, gathering my briefcase, rehearsing every step of what came next, with the same cold precision I used to trace a wiring diagram before a big job. There was no room left for error. The next morning, I trailed their car downtown at a careful distance and watched them walk into the glass-fronted offices of the real estate broker Danielle had been emailing. I waited near a potted plant in the lobby until Renata Cole stepped off the elevator in a sharp navy suit, briefcase in hand, 2 federal agents right behind her. She'd spent the last 2 days quietly handing over everything we had. The forged documents, the wire fraud attempt, the audio, to people who take that sort of thing very seriously. I straightened my tie, walked across that marble lobby, and pushed open the conference room door myself. Corey's face went white. Danielle's polished smile shattered on the spot. Neither of them said a word as I stood there, and neither of them moved when Renata walked in behind me and set her briefcase down on the table with a sharp, deliberate click. She introduced me properly this time, not as their broken old father, but as the sole owner of Bridgewater Property Group, the company that now legally held title to the house they'd spent all morning trying to sell. She told them Bridgewater had also quietly purchased their delinquent debt from the unlicensed lender the day before, at a premium, meaning the men who'd threatened to burn my house down were no longer their problem. For one stupid second, relief washed over Corey's face, like he thought I'd swooped in to save him. Then Renata told them the rest, that as their new sole creditor, Bridgewater was calling the debt due immediately, in full, and that since I'd transferred the house out of my name weeks earlier, they had spent the entire morning trying to sell property that legally belonged to somebody else. Danielle's legs gave out. The federal agents stepped forward with handcuffs, reading off a wire fraud charge in that flat, official tone. Corey didn't run. He just dropped to his knees on that cold marble floor, sobbing, begging me to stop this, telling me he was still my son. I looked down at him and felt nothing but the truth settling into place where love used to live. "This house stopped being yours weeks ago," I told him, "and you stopped being my son the night you let your mother die to protect your bank account." They led him out crying. Danielle didn't say a single word, just stared straight ahead, mascara running, as they walked her past the broker's stunned receptionist and out to the elevator. 3 months later, I'm standing on a porch in Montana that Doris left me without ever asking for a thing in return, watching the sun come up gold over the tree line. Corey and Danielle are both awaiting trial now, facing decades between the fraud and what the prosecutors are calling reckless endangerment tied to the hospital records. The men who threatened my life got swept up in a much bigger federal case, built off what Renata handed over. I couldn't stand the thought of ever living in that Lakewood house again, so I had it signed over to a nonprofit that takes in elderly folks abandoned or mistreated by their own families. The exact house my son tried to sell out from under me is a shelter now for people just like I almost became. I take my coffee out here every morning and watch the light come up over land my wife protected for 40 years without ever once mentioning it. I don't feel broken anymore. I feel like I finally understand what she was trying to teach that boy his whole life, and like somewhere, she's sitting right beside me, glad I finished the lesson for her. Blood never guaranteed loyalty. Love should never blind you to the truth sitting right in front of you. If Walter's story kept you glued to your seat tonight, hit that subscribe button and tell me down in the comments how you would have handled Corey and Danielle. I'll see you next time.